The niece that changed everything. The day started like any other, mundane, unremarkable. I was folding laundry in our bedroom, enjoying a rare moment of quiet when Jake, my husband of 6 years, burst into the room. The look on his face startled me. It was a mix of frustration and impatience, something I had seen increasingly over the last few months. "Move out of this room," he said abruptly, his voice cold and detached. I paused, confused. "Excuse me?" I set the folded sheet down, trying to keep calm, even though I could already feel irritation bubbling up. "This is our bedroom, Jake. Why would I need to move?" Jake rubbed the back of his neck, as if the very conversation was an inconvenience. "Emma's coming to stay for a while. She needs a comfortable room, and this is the best one. You can sleep in the guest room." I blinked in disbelief. Emma, his 22-year-old niece, had always been spoiled and a little too entitled for my taste. While I didn't mind her staying over from time to time, being asked, no, ordered, to vacate my own bedroom for her was absurd. "You're asking me to give up our bedroom for Emma?" My voice trembled slightly, a mixture of frustration and shock. "She can stay in the guest room like she always has. That room is perfectly fine." Jake crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "She's family, and she deserves the best. She's been going through a lot lately and needs the space." I scoffed. "And I'm not family? Where am I supposed to fit in all this, Jake? Why should I move because your niece is coming?" His face hardened, and I knew I had touched a nerve. "This isn't up for debate," he said sharply. "Just pack your stuff and move to the guest room. End of discussion." I stood there for a moment, staring at the man I thought I knew so well, the man I had built a life with. How had we come to this? How had he gotten to the point where he would treat me like an unwelcome guest in my own home? Realizing there was no point in arguing with him, I gathered my things, albeit angrily, and began to move them into the much smaller guest room. I had spent years trying to blend in with Jake's family, who always viewed me with subtle disdain. To them, I wasn't good enough, and now I was being physically pushed out of my space to accommodate their spoiled princess. That evening, Emma arrived with her usual flair. She swept into the house like she owned the place, wearing a stylish outfit that was clearly meant to impress. Her perfectly curled hair bounced as she waltzed into the living room, barely glancing at me before turning to Jake with a dazzling smile. "Uncle Jake!" she squealed, throwing her arms around him in a dramatic hug. "It's so good to see you. Thanks for letting me stay here. I knew I could always count on you." Jake smiled back, a little too brightly for my liking. "Of course, Emma. You know you're always welcome here." I stood to the side, feeling like an intruder in my own home. When Emma finally acknowledged me, it was with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Auntie," she said sweetly, as though she hadn't just displaced me. "Thanks for letting me take your room. It's much nicer than staying in some hotel." I forced a smile, swallowing my pride. "You're welcome." The days that followed were nothing short of a nightmare. Emma treated our home like her personal hotel. She never lifted a finger to help with the housework, leaving a trail of discarded clothes and empty cups wherever she went. She monopolized the bathroom in the mornings, leaving me barely enough time to get ready for work. And worst of all, she constantly made snide comments, disguised as playful banter, about how Jake was the real reason everything in the house ran smoothly. Jake, of course, did nothing to curb her behavior. In fact, he seemed to enjoy the attention, basking in the role of her doting uncle. Anytime I brought up my frustrations, he brushed me off with excuses. "She's going through a rough time," he would say. "Just give her some space." Space. That's exactly what I was being forced to give. My personal space, my emotional space, my entire sense of belonging in my own home. It wasn't until a week later that everything began to unravel. That evening I had just finished making dinner, a simple pasta dish that Emma had requested, and was setting the table when I overheard her on the phone in the living room. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, and for some reason it piqued my curiosity. I moved closer, careful not to make any noise. "Yeah, I've got it all sorted," Emma whispered. "Uncle Jake is so easy to manipulate. I mean, seriously, I'm staying in their master bedroom while she's stuck in the guest room. It's hilarious." My heart pounded as I listened, my grip tightening on the plate in my hands. She continued, laughing softly. "He's wrapped around my finger. He does whatever I want, no questions asked. And Auntie? She's a pushover. She just lets it happen. A wave of anger surged through me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emma wasn't just selfish, she was calculating. She was playing us both, using Jake's loyalty to her advantage while treating me like a doormat. That night, I confronted Jake after Emma went to bed. I told him everything I had heard, hoping he would finally see through her manipulations. Jake, she's using you, I said, my voice trembling with both anger and desperation. Emma doesn't care about you or me. She's just here to take advantage of your kindness. Jake's reaction wasn't what I had hoped. Instead of acknowledging my concerns, he defended her. You're overreacting, he said, dismissing my words with a wave of his hand. Emma wouldn't do that. She's family, and family doesn't manipulate each other. I felt a lump form in my throat. Jake, I heard her. She's bragging about how easy it is to manipulate you. How much more proof do you need? He shook his head, his expression hardening. I'm not going to stand here and listen to you badmouth my niece. This conversation is over. I was crushed. I had tried to warn him, to make him see what was happening, but he refused to listen. It felt like the final blow in a series of small betrayals that had been building for years. The next morning, everything came crashing down in the most unexpected way. As I was getting ready for work, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a tall, athletic man standing on our front porch, looking both anxious and determined. Is Emma here? He asked, his eyes scanning the house behind me. Yes, she is, I replied, unsure of who he was. And you are? I'm David, her boyfriend, he said, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. She told me she was staying with family because she needed help, but something doesn't feel right. I just wanted to check on her. I blinked, taken aback. Boyfriend? Emma had never mentioned a boyfriend, and from the look on David's face, I could tell that something wasn't adding up. Come in, I said, stepping aside to let him in. She's in the living room. David followed me inside, and when Emma saw him, her face turned ghostly pale. She jumped up from the couch, clearly panicking. David, what are you doing here? She stammered, her voice shaky. I could ask you the same thing, David replied, crossing his arms over his chest. You told me you were in a bad situation, staying with family because you needed help. But from the looks of it, you're living it up here, taking advantage of everyone. Emma looked around frantically, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to come up with an excuse. It's not like that, David. Uncle Jake wanted me to stay. He insisted. David wasn't buying it. I'm done, Emma. I've had enough of your lies. You've been using me just like you've been using them. I'm not sticking around for this anymore. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Emma standing there, speechless and humiliated. The color drained from her face as the reality of the situation sank in. Jake came into the room, his expression one of confusion. What's going on? He asked, looking between me and Emma. I took a deep breath and turned to him. David just revealed what I've been trying to tell you all along. Emma has been lying to all of us. Jake stared at Emma, waiting for her to explain, but she remained silent, her eyes glued to the floor. I'm sorry, Uncle Jake, she finally muttered, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Jake's face fell. He was clearly struggling to process everything. For the first time, he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the guilt written across his face. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I should have listened to you. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake realized how blind his loyalty to his family had made him. Emma packed her things and left that afternoon, leaving behind an empty space that had once been filled with her manipulative presence. Jake and I spent the next few days in silence, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy, but the events that unfolded with Emma made us both realize the importance of standing by each other, of seeing each other as partners, not enemies. In the end, the niece who had driven us apart was the one who brought us back together. And in the most surprising twist of all, The shock wasn't just in the discovery of Emma's lies, it was in the realization of what truly mattered: each other. When Jake demands that his wife vacate their bedroom for his spoiled niece Emma, tensions quickly rise. What starts as a simple request spirals into a series of shocking revelations, leaving relationships shattered and loyalties questioned. As manipulation, deceit, and family loyalty clash, Jake's wife must decide how to reclaim her space and confront the niece who nearly tore their marriage apart.